It's Thursday, November 7th, 2024, 9:23 p.m. Washington, D.C.'s evening crowd flows past Daniel Hayes as he packs his guitar near the Connecticut Avenue Metro entrance, 2 blocks north of DuPont Circle. The temperature has dropped to 51 degrees, cold enough that most pedestrians walk briskly, collars turned up against the wind tunneling between buildings. Daniel wears a worn leather jacket over a flannel shirt, his breath visible in the glow of streetlights. His guitar case lies open on the pavement, scattered with bills and coins. $140 earned over 3 hours of performance. To the business people and students hurrying past, he's just another street musician wrapping up for the night. 3 men approach from across Connecticut Avenue. They move with purpose, not the casual gait of commuters. Black peacoats, dark jeans, deliberate spacing between them, 15 feet separating each man. The lead walks with his hands in his pockets. The 2 flanking him keep their arms loose at their sides. They've done this before. Daniel doesn't notice them yet. He's coiling his amplifier cable, humming the melody of the last corrido he performed, a traditional ballad about El Chapo's 2015 escape from Altiplano prison. It's a historical piece, part of his research on narco folklore at Johns Hopkins University. To Daniel, it's academic material. To the 3 men now 50 feet away, it's a declaration of war. What none of them know, what Daniel himself doesn't fully understand, is that 2 blocks south, inside a black Chevy Suburban with tinted windows, Major General Richard Hayes is watching through military-grade surveillance equipment. He's been waiting 18 months for this moment. The son, Daniel Marcus Hayes, was born February 14, 1998, at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. His father was deployed in Kosovo when he arrived, wouldn't meet his son for another 4 months. His mother, Christina Hayes, was a State Department analyst who spoke 6 languages and understood 7 more. Daniel grew up in military housing at Fort Myer, Virginia, the only child of parents who were rarely home simultaneously. He learned early that family dinners happened when missions allowed, that birthdays got celebrated a week late or early depending on deployment schedules, that the phrase "Dad's traveling for work" meant something different in his household than it did for his classmates. By age 12, Daniel had lived in 4 states and 2 countries. He spoke conversational Spanish and Arabic before he understood algebra. Most military children either embrace the structure or rebel against it. Daniel chose a third path. He became an observer. He watched how people adapted to new environments, how language shaped thought, how music carried cultural memory across borders. When his mother died of an aneurysm during his sophomore year of high school, collapsing at her desk in the State Department while translating intercepted cartel communications, Daniel withdrew into anthropology and ethnomusicology. He attended Georgetown University on a combination of ROTC scholarships and survivor benefits he never touched. Graduated summa cum laude in 2020, turned down a commission in Army intelligence, his father's subtle suggestion, and instead enrolled in Johns Hopkins Cultural Anthropology doctoral program. His dissertation topic, Corridos and Cartel Mythology, How Narco Ballads Shape Public Perception of Organized Crime. For 2 years, Daniel had been conducting field research. He'd traveled to Sinaloa, Michoacan, and Tamaulipas, recording corrido performers and analyzing lyrical patterns. He'd interviewed former cartel associates in federal prisons. He'd built a database of 847 narco corridos, cross-referencing them with actual cartel operations to study the gap between myth and reality. The street performances started 6 months ago. Daniel discovered that performing corridos in public, where Mexican and Central American immigrants gathered, generated conversations his formal interviews never could. People would approach after shows, share family stories, correct his pronunciation, suggest forgotten ballads. Some nights he made $40. Some nights he made $200. The money didn't matter. He was documenting living history. His apartment in Adams Morgan, a studio on the 3rd floor of a converted townhouse, was exactly what you'd expect from a doctoral student. Books stacked on every surface, a recording setup cobbled together from second-hand equipment, walls covered with maps marking cartel territories and migration patterns, a mini fridge containing mostly condiments and yesterday's coffee. Daniel lived on a $28,000 annual stipend from Johns Hopkins, supplemented by street performance income he meticulously reported on his taxes. He hadn't asked his father for money since undergrad. That independence was important to him, perhaps too important. It created distance he told himself was healthy but sometimes felt like abandonment. They spoke every 2 weeks, conversations that rarely lasted more than 15 minutes. Daniel would summarize his research progress. His father would offer careful encouragement while avoiding questions about why a man with his son's clearance eligibility was studying cartel folklore instead of joining the intelligence community. Neither acknowledged the obvious. Daniel was studying the same criminal networks his mother had been tracking when she died. Tonight, Daniel is wearing the guitar strap his mother gave him for his 16th birthday, 3 months before the aneurysm. It's brown leather with turquoise inlay, bought during a family trip to Santa Fe, one of maybe 5 real vacations they'd taken. He doesn't perform without it. At 9:23 p.m., as he kneels to close his guitar case, Daniel Hayes has no idea that his academic research has intersected with an active cartel enforcement operation. He doesn't know that the corrido he performed about El Chapo, a song he chose because it's melodically beautiful and historically significant, has been flagged by a Sinaloa intelligence cell monitoring social media for unauthorized narco content in their DC territory. He doesn't know that 3 men have been watching his performances for 2 weeks, photographing his face, tracking his movements, running background checks through corrupted DMV databases. He doesn't know they've identified him as a low-level threat, a graduate student who needs to be warned, not eliminated, someone whose disappearance would draw unwanted attention, but whose intimidation would send a message to others. And he absolutely doesn't know that his father has been running a parallel operation, using sophisticated signals intelligence to map the same cell, waiting for them to surface so he can dismantle their entire DC network in one coordinated strike. Daniel stands slinging the guitar case over his shoulder. The 3 men are now 30 feet away. In 8 seconds, 2 separate worlds, academia and warfare, research and retribution, innocence and violence, are about to collide on a DC sidewalk. The father, Richard James Hayes, was born in 1961 in Fort Benning, Georgia, the son and grandson of Army officers. Military service wasn't a choice in his family. It was gravity. He graduated West Point in 1983, second in his class, commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in infantry. By 1985, he'd completed Ranger School and was selected for Special Forces assessment. What happened between 1985 and 2024 is partially redacted, partially legend, and partially the kind of operational history that doesn't appear in official records. What's publicly documented: Hayes served in Grenada, Panama, the First Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He received 3 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart for injuries sustained during a classified operation in Yemen in 2003. What's less documented but widely known in special operations communities: Hayes was part of the team that hunted Pablo Escobar in Colombia. He developed the intelligence methodology that later became standard for tracking cartel leadership. He wrote the tactical manual on urban counter-narcotics operations that JSOC still uses. His call sign was Prophet, because of his seemingly supernatural ability to predict enemy movement patterns. Between 2008 and 2019, Hayes commanded Joint Special Operations Command, overseeing operations in 73 countries. He made 2-star general at 54. Unusually young for that rank. He was on track for a 3rd star when Christina died. The aneurysm happened on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd been translating intercepted communications between Sinaloa Cartel lieutenants operating in the DC metro area, routine intelligence work she'd done for 15 years. A blood vessel in her brain, weakened by hypertension she'd ignored because she was too busy to see doctors, ruptured at 3:47 p.m. She was pronounced dead at George Washington University Hospital at 4:22 p.m. Hayes was in a skiff at Fort Bragg when he got the call. He'd been reviewing target packages for an operation in Syria. He remembers hanging up the phone, staring at satellite imagery of a compound 7,000 miles away, and thinking about how Christina always said she'd outlive him because combat veterans don't make it to old age. She was wrong. She was wrong about a lot of things, but especially that. He buried his wife at Arlington National Cemetery on a cold morning in November 2016. Daniel was 18, a freshman at Georgetown, barely holding himself together. Hayes requested bereavement leave. spent 3 weeks helping his son process grief neither of them knew how to express. Then he returned to Fort Bragg and threw himself into work with an intensity that worried his colleagues. For 3 years, Hayes operated at the edge of burnout. He pushed harder, slept less, accepted every deployment. His subordinates noticed the change. Prophet had become relentless, brilliant, but cold, making tactical decisions with brutal efficiency and zero emotional consideration. He was running from something, and everyone knew it. In 2019, Hayes retired, not because he wanted to, but because 2-star generals don't get to remain operational indefinitely, and Hayes had no interest in the political requirements of achieving a 3rd star. He was 58 years old, had spent 36 years in uniform, and had no idea what to do with himself. The Defense Intelligence Agency offered him a consulting position 6 weeks into his retirement. They needed his expertise on transnational criminal organizations, specifically, cartels establishing sophisticated operations within the United States. The pay was $240,000 annually, roughly equivalent to his general's salary. The work was analytical, not operational. He'd review intelligence, provide strategic recommendations, brief policymakers. No field work, no command authority. A desk job for an old warrior who couldn't fully step away. Hayes accepted, then immediately began bending the parameters of his position. Using his clearance and institutional relationships, he started tracking cartel infrastructure in major American cities. Not drugs. Interdiction was DEA's job. He focused on enforcement cells, the small teams cartels deployed to maintain discipline, collect debts, and eliminate problems. These cells operated in legal gray zones, often avoiding direct criminal activity while creating climates of fear in immigrant communities. They were ghosts. 3 to 6 men with clean records, usually Mexican nationals with valid visas or second-generation Americans with family ties to cartel regions. They'd arrive in a city, rent apartments under corporate leases, establish communication with local distributors, and handle problems with surgical precision. Then they'd vanish, replaced by new faces every 6 to 8 months. Traditional law enforcement struggled with these cells because they rarely committed prosecutable crimes on U.S. soil. They'd intimidate, threaten, surveil, but actual violence was reserved for extreme circumstances. By the time police identified cell members, they'd already rotated out. Hayes developed a different approach. Instead of reacting to crimes, he used signals intelligence to predict where cells would deploy based on cartel communication patterns. He'd identify target cities, then work with local FBI field offices to establish surveillance infrastructure before the cells arrived. The goal wasn't immediate arrest. It was comprehensive network mapping. Let them establish operations, document everything, then dismantle the entire structure simultaneously. For 18 months, Hayes had been tracking a Sinaloa cell in Washington, D.C. 6 men total, operating in 2-man teams, rotating living situations every 6 weeks. They ran a legitimate import business, high-end Mexican furniture and textiles, as cover. Their actual job: maintain cartel interests in a city with significant Mexican and Central American populations, particularly monitoring music and media for content that disrespected the organization. Corridos were sensitive territory for Sinaloa. The cartel's mythology depended on controlling their narrative. Which songs got performed, which stories got told, which legends got perpetuated. Unauthorized corridos, especially those glorifying rivals or mocking leadership, couldn't be tolerated. In Mexico, musicians who crossed those lines disappeared. In the United States, where disappearances drew federal attention, the approach was subtler. Intimidation, equipment destruction, financial pressure, forcing musicians to stop performing certain material. Hayes had documented 17 separate incidents of the D.C. cell threatening musicians over the past year. All remained unreported because victims feared escalation. The cell operated with near impunity, certain that immigrant communities wouldn't cooperate with authorities. What Hayes needed was an incident significant enough to justify a federal takedown, but controlled enough to prevent civilian casualties. He needed the cell to make a move that was clearly threatening, but stopped before actual violence occurred. He needed them to surface simultaneously, not scattered across the city in 2-man teams. When Daniel started performing corridos at DuPont Circle 6 months ago, Hayes watched with professional interest that gradually became personal concern. His son was conducting legitimate research, completely unaware he was operating in documented cartel territory. Hayes considered warning him, but Daniel's relationship with his father was already strained. Interference would only push him further away. Instead, Hayes did what he'd been trained to do. He turned a vulnerability into an opportunity. He escalated surveillance on Daniel, not to protect him but to monitor who was monitoring him. When the Sinaloa cell started photographing Daniel's performances 3 weeks ago, Hayes knew exactly what it meant. They'd identified his son as a problem. For the past 15 days, Hayes had been preparing a tactical response. He coordinated with FBI's Washington field office, establishing a joint task force under counter-terrorism authorities. He positioned surveillance assets around Daniel's regular performance locations. He ensured Daniel's phone had emergency tracking enabled. Without Daniel's knowledge, which was legally questionable but operationally necessary. Tonight, November 7th at 9:23 p.m., Hayes sits in a Chevy Suburban 2 blocks from where his son is packing up his guitar. He's watching through a tactical camera mounted on a building across Connecticut Avenue. 3 men are approaching Daniel, the same 3 Hayes has been tracking for 11 months. Next to Hayes in the Suburban are 2 FBI tactical agents, part of a 12-person team positioned throughout the area. 4 more agents are in an adjacent building, 1 sniper on a rooftop 300 feet away. Everyone has clear lines of sight. Everyone has specific rules of engagement. No intervention until Hayes gives the signal, unless Daniel is in immediate mortal danger. Hayes watches the lead man gesture toward Daniel, watches his son look up, confused, watches the conversation begin. "Stay tight," Hayes says into his radio. "Let it develop." An FBI agent named Torres, seated in the back, says quietly, "Sir, that's your son." "I'm aware, Agent Torres. Rules of engagement will be followed precisely. I need them to commit to a clear threat. I need all 3 on scene. I need their words documented on audio before we move." Torres doesn't respond. He's been briefed on Hayes' background, knows arguing with a man who planned operations in 73 countries is pointless. But the tension in the vehicle is palpable. Everyone understands they're watching a general use his son as bait. Hayes tells himself this is controlled. Acceptable risk. Daniel is never in actual danger because Hayes has the entire situation locked down. This is no different than operations he's run hundreds of times. Human assets in position, civilian near hostile forces, wait for clear evidence of intent before neutralization. Except it's completely different, and Hayes knows it. The man with the guitar case is his son, the only family he has left, the person who stopped calling him Dad 3 years ago and started using Richard in conversation. The kid who blamed him, maybe fairly, for Christina's death, because if Hayes hadn't been deployed so often, maybe his wife wouldn't have worked such brutal hours. Maybe she would have seen a doctor. Maybe things would have been different. Hayes pushes the thought away. Focus on the operation. Trust the training. Execute the mission. On the monitor, the lead man steps closer to Daniel. Hayes adjusts the audio gain, capturing every word. The trigger. The lead man's name is Miguel Angel Santos, though he's carried 4 different identities in the past 3 years. He's 34 years old, born in Culiacan, Sinaloa, recruited into cartel operations at 16. He's not an enforcer in the traditional sense. No history of violence, no criminal record beyond a single juvenile possession charge from 2006. His specialty is psychological operations, identifying problems, delivering precise threats, ensuring compliance through fear rather than force. Santos has been in D.C. for 8 months. He rents a 2-bedroom apartment in Arlington under a corporate lease tied to the furniture import business. He drives a leased Honda Accord, pays taxes, maintains a clean profile. To neighbors, he's a quiet businessman who travels frequently. To the 3 men who work under him, he's a professional who never needs to raise his voice. The 2 men flanking him are Marco Ruiz and Javier Delgado, both second-generation Mexican-Americans from Los Angeles. They joined the organization for the same reasons most do: family connections, limited opportunities, and the intoxicating promise of respect. They're not killers, they're intimidators. The difference matters, legally and psychologically. Santos stops 6 feet from Daniel. Professional distance. Close enough to be threatening, far enough to avoid physical confrontation. He's done this calculation 17 times in D.C. alone. Daniel Hayes, Santos says. His English carries only a trace of accent, educated and deliberate. We need to talk about your music. Daniel looks up from closing his guitar case. His first thought is that this might be someone interested in his research. He's been approached by other musicians, academics, even journalists covering immigration issues. His second thought, triggered by the spacing of the three men and the formal tone, is that something is wrong. I'm sorry, Daniel says, standing slowly. Do I know you? You don't. But we know you. Johns Hopkins, Cultural Anthropology, studying corridos. You performed 7 songs tonight. 4 were historically accurate. 3 were problematic. Daniel's academic instincts kick in before his survival instincts. Problematic how? The song about El Chapo's escape. You presented it as heroic, glorifying a man who betrayed important people. Now Daniel understands he's read enough about cartel dynamics to recognize what's happening. These aren't academics. They're not law enforcement. They're representatives of an organization that views certain songs as political statements. His hands start to tremble slightly. He forces them still. It's a traditional corrido, Daniel says, keeping his voice steady. I'm documenting musical history, not making political statements. I'm a researcher. Research has consequences, Santos says, especially when it involves stories that disrespect certain organizations. We're not here to harm you. We're here to provide guidance. Marco and Javier have spread further apart now, creating a triangle formation. They're not aggressive, hands visible, postures relaxed, but the positioning is strategic. No easy escape route. Maximum psychological pressure. Daniel thinks about running. He's 6 feet tall, reasonably athletic, and the metro entrance is 60 feet away. But he's also carrying a guitar worth $3,200 and 3 years of field recordings on his phone. More importantly, running would be acknowledgement of guilt, transformation from researcher into target. I appreciate the feedback, Daniel says, using every ounce of his mother's diplomatic training. But I'm conducting academic research protected by the First Amendment. I'm not affiliated with any organization. I'm documenting cultural history. The First Amendment, Santos says, is an American concept. The people I represent operate under different principles. Music isn't abstract to them. It's reputation, it's power, it's communication. When you perform certain songs, you're communicating messages, whether you intend to or not. Then I'll be more careful about which songs I perform. Being careful isn't enough. We need you to stop performing corridos entirely. Find different research methods. Your dissertation can focus on historical recordings, archived material. Live performance creates problems. Daniel's face flushes. 3 years of research. Hundreds of hours of field work. Relationships built with musicians who trusted him. His entire dissertation methodology, suddenly invalidated by 3 men who appeared from nowhere. That's not reasonable, Daniel says, and immediately regrets the words. Reasonable implies negotiation. These men aren't here to negotiate. Santos steps closer. 5 feet now. We're being reasonable by having this conversation instead of others. You're a smart person. Johns Hopkins doesn't accept unintelligent students. So be smart now. Pack your guitar. Go home. Tomorrow start researching something else. Mexican pottery, immigration patterns, anything except corridos. Daniel's phone is in his jacket pocket. His father installed some kind of emergency app months ago. Daniel never paid attention to what it did, considered it typical overprotective behavior. Now he wishes he'd learned how it worked. I need to think about this, Daniel says. You're thinking right now, Santos responds. We can see you thinking. You're calculating whether to comply, whether to contact authorities, whether we're serious. Let me simplify. We are completely serious. This isn't a request. This is notification of how things will proceed. 2 blocks away in the Suburban, Hayes listens to every word. His jaw is tight. His hands, resting on his knees, are clenched into fists. We have clear threat articulation, Agent Torres says. That's enough for intervention. Not yet, Hayes says. General, with respect, they haven't touched him. They haven't displayed weapons. A defense attorney would argue this is protected speech, Intimidating but not criminal. I need more. On screen, Santos reaches into his coat pocket. Everyone in the Suburban tenses. The sniper on the rooftop adjusts his scope. But Santos pulls out a business card, extends it toward Daniel. This has a phone number, Santos says. Tomorrow you'll call it and confirm you've understood our conversation. If you don't call, we'll assume you need additional persuasion. That persuasion will be less polite. Daniel doesn't take the card. Santos places it on the closed guitar case. One more thing, Santos says. We know where you live. Adams Morgan, 18th Street, 3rd floor studio. Window faces the alley. We know your class schedule. We know your advisor's office hours. We know you visit your father every 3rd Sunday at his condo in Alexandria. We're telling you this so you understand. Cooperation is your only option. Resistance creates complications for everyone you care about. That's the line Hayes was waiting for. Go, 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 he says into his radio. 4 things happen simultaneously. 12 FBI agents emerge from positions around Connecticut Avenue, weapons drawn, identifying themselves with clear commands. FBI. Hands where we can see them. The sniper on the rooftop maintains his sight picture on Santos, ready to engage if any of the 3 men reach for weapons. The Suburban's doors open and Hayes steps out, moving toward the scene with Torres and another agent flanking him. And Daniel, finally understanding he's been watched this entire time, looks directly at the tactical camera across the street and mouths 2 words. You knew. Santos and his associates don't run. They're professionals. Running would be admission of guilt and tactical stupidity. You don't outrun radio communication. Instead, Santos raises his hands slowly, face calm, calculating his next moves. We're having a conversation, Santos says to the approaching agents. No crime here, just talking. Threatening a civilian, stalking, conspiracy to intimidate. Agent Torres calls out. Everyone on the ground, hands behind your head. Marco and Javier comply immediately. They're smart enough to know compliance now creates legal flexibility later. Santos takes an extra 3 seconds, a small act of defiance, then kneels and assumes the position. Hayes reaches the scene as FBI agents are applying zip tie restraints. He stops 10 feet from his son. Daniel stares at him. How long have you been watching? We can discuss that later. How long? Long enough to keep you safe. Safe? Daniel's voice cracks. You used me as bait. You knew they were targeting me and you just watched. Waited for them to threaten me so you could, what? Make an arrest? Complete your operation? Hayes doesn't respond immediately. What can he say that isn't either a lie or a confirmation of exactly what Daniel suspects? I had 12 agents positioned to intervene the moment you were in actual danger, Hayes says. You were never at risk. I was terrified. I know. I'm sorry. But we needed clear evidence of intent. We needed them to commit to threats we could prosecute. And we needed all 3 on scene simultaneously to prevent the others from escaping. This was the only way to dismantle their entire network. Daniel picks up his guitar case, hands still trembling. I'm your son. Not an asset. Not an intelligence opportunity. I'm your son, and you treated me like I was part of an operation. You were part of an operation the moment you started performing those songs in their territory. I didn't create that situation. I just managed it. Managed it, Daniel repeats. Right, because that's what you do. Manage situations, control variables, execute missions. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I didn't want to be managed? That maybe I could have made my own decisions if you just told me the truth? Hayes watches his son walk toward the metro entrance, guitar case over his shoulder. Agents are still processing the arrest, documenting evidence, reading rights. Santos is silent, watching Hayes with professional assessment, recognizing exactly who orchestrated this. Torres approaches. We need your statement, General. You'll have it, Hayes says, still watching his son disappear down the metro stairs. Give me 10 minutes. Sir, procedure? 10 minutes, Agent Torres. Hayes walks to the Suburban, sits in the driver's seat, and allows himself exactly 30 seconds to acknowledge what just happened. His son is safe. The operation was successful. 3 cartel operatives are in custody, and the intelligence gathered from their phones will dismantle enforcement operations in 4 cities. Christina would have known what to say. She always did. She'd translate his tactical thinking into human language, help him understand that sometimes protecting people means trusting them with the truth, even when the truth creates risk. But Christina is gone, buried at Arlington under a simple headstone that reads, "Loving Mother, Faithful Servant." And Hayes is left with the same skill set that's defined his entire life: the ability to identify threats, position assets, and execute operations with ruthless efficiency. He's never learned how to do the other thing, the thing Christina did naturally, which is love someone without turning them into an operational consideration. Hayes takes out his phone, starts to text Daniel, then stops. What would he even say? That he's sorry? That he'd do the same thing again because the mathematics of the situation demanded it? That protecting his son means sometimes treating him like a stranger? He deletes the unsent message and gets out of the Suburban. Agent Torres is waiting with a tablet for his official statement. Hayes provides precise details, times, communications, tactical decisions. He's good at this part. Reports, documentation, turning human drama into bureaucratic language. What he doesn't include in the report: the moment he watched Santos step closer to Daniel and felt his chest constrict with something that wasn't tactical concern, but raw fear. The moment he calculated whether he could reach his son before Santos could draw a weapon. The moment he realized he'd become exactly what he'd spent 36 years training to be: a man who sees every situation as a mission, every person as an asset, every relationship as a network diagram waiting to be exploited. The arrest processing takes 40 minutes. All three men are transported to FBI Washington field office for interrogation. Hayes provides brief testimony, then is released. It's 10:47 p.m. He should go home, file additional reports, brief his DIA supervisor. Instead, he drives to Adams Morgan. Before we continue with what happens next, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city and state in the comments. This story happened in Washington, D.C., but cartel operations exist in every major American city. I want to know where this channel reaches, and I want to hear from you throughout this story. Have you ever felt caught between family loyalty and doing what you thought was right? Think about that as we continue. ACT2, the confrontation. The apartment. Daniel's studio apartment is exactly as Hayes remembers from the last time he visited, 8 months ago. Too small, too expensive, filled with evidence of obsessive research, maps on the walls, books stacked on every horizontal surface. A recording setup that probably cost more than the furniture. Hayes knocks at 11:04 p.m. No answer. He knocks again. "I know you're there, Daniel." I can hear the floor creak. The door opens 6 inches, chain still engaged. Daniel's face appears in the gap. "You need to leave. We need to talk." "No, we don't. You talked enough when you were coordinating your surveillance operation using your son as bait. That covered everything." "Daniel." "General Hayes," Daniel interrupts, and the formality is a weapon. "I appreciate that your operation was successful. I'm sure you'll receive commendations. I'm sure the after-action report will be very impressive, but I'm not interested in hearing the tactical justification for how you used me. So please, leave." Hayes puts his hand against the door, not forcing it, but making his presence impossible to ignore. 5 minutes. After that, if you want me gone, I'll go. But give me 5 minutes to explain. The door closes. For a moment, Hayes thinks that's the answer. Then he hears the chain sliding free. The door opens fully. Daniel's apartment is smaller than Hayes expected, maybe 400 square feet total. A bed in one corner, kitchenette in another, bathroom door open revealing a space barely large enough to stand in. The rest is research. Corkboards with photographs of musicians, transcribed lyrics in Spanish with English translations, a map of Mexico with pins marking where specific corridos originated. "I've been tracking the Sinaloa cell for 18 months, Hayes begins. "I don't care. You should care. Because they've been tracking you for 3 weeks. You stumbled into an active cartel enforcement zone without realizing it. If I hadn't been monitoring them, you'd have been alone with those men tonight. So you're saying I should be grateful? Thank you, Father, for endangering me to complete your operation." Hayes takes a controlled breath. "I'm saying the danger existed whether I was involved or not. The moment you started performing corridos in DuPont Circle, You became a problem for them. I didn't create that situation. You did, through your research. Don't you dare blame me for... I'm not blaming you. I'm stating facts. You're conducting legitimate research. But research has consequences when it intersects with criminal organizations. Those men weren't there because of me. They were there because of you. Daniel sits on his bed, head in his hands. When he speaks again, his voice is quieter. Why didn't you warn me? Would you have listened? You didn't give me the chance to find out. You're right, Hayes admits. I should have told you. I rationalized that telling you would compromise the operation. That if you changed your behavior, the cell would notice and disappear. That maintaining your normal routine was safer than alerting you to the threat. That's not parenting. That's asset management. I know. Do you? Daniel looks up. Do you actually know? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks exactly like every other decision you've made in my life. Mom dies because she's working herself to death, and you respond by deploying more. I'm struggling in school and you send care packages instead of coming home. I tell you I'm not joining the military, and you act like it's a personal betrayal. And now I'm doing independent research and you turn it into an operation. Hayes doesn't have a defense for most of that. The deployments after Christina's death were running from grief. The care packages were inadequate substitutes for presence. The disappointment about Daniel's career choice was barely concealed. Your mother was better at this than me, Hayes says finally. She knew how to be close to you and still let you be independent. I only know how to protect or disengage. There's no middle ground in my training. Then maybe you need different training. Maybe I do. They sit in silence. Outside, DC continues. Sirens in the distance, conversations from neighboring apartments, the constant hum of a city that never fully sleeps. What happens now? Daniel asks. To them, I mean. The three men. They'll be charged with conspiracy to threaten, stalking, possibly witness intimidation if we can establish they knew you'd been interviewed by federal investigators, which they didn't, but creative prosecutors can make arguments. They'll be held at DC Central Detention Facility pending arraignment. And then? Depends on their attorneys. Best case for them. Charges get reduced to misdemeanor harassment. They serve 90 days, get deported. Worst case, federal prosecutors tie them to other incidents. Stack charges, they're looking at 5 to 7 years before deportation. That's it? 5 to 7 years for representing a cartel? Welcome to the American justice system. We can arrest enforcement cells, but unless we catch them in the act of violence or trafficking, the charges are limited. That's why we need incidents like tonight. Clear threats, documented intent. It builds the case file that eventually dismantles the organization. Daniel stands, walks to his kitchenette, fills a glass with water. I have recordings of 47 corridos. Interviews with 6 musicians who've been threatened by cartels. 3 years of research that I can't publish now without worrying that I'm painting targets on sources. You could publish under anonymity protocols. University journals have mechanisms. That's not the point. Daniel's control finally breaks. The point is, I had a life. I had research that mattered. I was documenting cultural history that's disappearing because people are too afraid to perform traditional music. And now that's contaminated because my father turned it into an intelligence operation. Hayes starts to respond, stops, starts again. You're right. I contaminated your research. I prioritized the operational objective over your academic integrity. I made a tactical decision that served my mission, but damaged yours. And I can't undo that. No, you can't. But I can help you recover it. University protections. Federal witness security protocols if needed. Resources to continue your research under controlled circumstances. Controlled circumstances, Daniel repeats. There it is again. Control. Management. Operational parameters. Do you hear yourself? I don't want your resources. I want a father who treats me like a son instead of an asset. The words hit Hayes harder than he expects. He's been called many things. Demanding commander, brilliant strategist, cold operator. But hearing his son articulate the fundamental failure of their relationship in such stark terms forces acknowledgement he's been avoiding. I don't know how to be that, Hayes says quietly. I've spent 40 years training to assess threats, position assets, execute missions. That's not an excuse, it's an explanation. When you started performing those songs, I saw a threat to neutralize, not a son who needed honest communication. And that's on me. Daniel leans against the counter, exhausted. What did Mom see in you? Really? Because I've tried to understand and I can't. She was brilliant and warm and present. You're not those things. Your mother saw potential I never fulfilled. She thought I could learn to separate the operator from the person. She was wrong, but she believed it long enough for us to build something real. And when she died, I lost the only person who could translate me into human language. That's not fair to her memory. She wasn't your translator. She was her own person. You're right. I'm expressing it wrong, which proves my point. I don't have the vocabulary for this conversation. I can brief colonels and senators and intelligence analysts. But talking to my son about how I failed him? I have no training for that. Daniel walks to one of the cork boards, touches a photograph of a Mexican musician he'd interviewed in Michoacan. This man told me his grandfather was killed for performing a corrido that disrespected local cartel leadership. He still performs the song in secret because he says cultural memory matters more than safety. He said, if we let them silence our history, we become ghosts in our own land. That's beautiful. It's also suicidal. But I admired it. That commitment to truth over safety. That willingness to risk everything for something he believed mattered. Hayes understands where this is going. And you think I prioritized safety over truth by not telling you about the threat, didn't you? Yes. Because in my experience, truth without adequate protection gets people killed. Your mother believed in transparency. It got her killed. Not directly, but the stress of her work, the refusal to prioritize her health over her mission. It accumulated until her brain couldn't sustain it. That's not fair. It's absolutely fair. She worked 80-hour weeks translating cartel communications because she believed her work saved lives. She was right, but it killed her. And I've spent 8 years asking myself whether I should have forced her to slow down, to take medical leave, to prioritize her survival over her mission. I didn't. I respected her autonomy. And she died. Daniel turns from the corkboard. So you decided not to make that mistake with me? You'd control my safety even if it meant lying to me? I decided I wouldn't lose you the same way I lost her. The honesty stops Daniel's next argument. He sits back on the bed, processing. That's not love, Dad. That's trauma response. You're treating me like a tactical problem because you couldn't solve the tactical problem that killed Mom. But I'm not a problem to be solved. I'm a person trying to live my life. I know that intellectually. But intellectually knowing something and integrating it into decision-making are different things. When I saw those men targeting you, every instinct I have said, establish control, position assets, execute protection protocol. The fact that you're my son made me more determined to succeed, not less inclined to treat it as an operation. That's the problem. Being your son should have made you trust me enough to tell me the truth. Instead, it made you more controlling. Hayes has no counter-argument. Daniel is correct. The emotional stakes made Hayes default to what he knows, operational control, rather than risk the vulnerability of honest communication. What do you want from me? Hayes asks. Right now specifically. What would make this better? Daniel thinks for a long moment. I want you to acknowledge that you were wrong. Not tactically wrong. I understand the operation was successful. Morally wrong. You violated my autonomy. You treated me as a means to an end. And I want to hear you say that was wrong, not just unfortunate or tactically necessary, but actually ethically wrong. Hayes feels the military instinct to defend the decision, to argue that outcomes justify methods, that protecting Daniel required exactly the approach he used. But Daniel isn't asking for a tactical defense. He's asking for moral accountability. You're right, Hayes says. What I did was wrong. Not just in execution, but in fundamental premise. I treated you as an asset because it was easier than trusting you as an equal. I prioritized my operational comfort over your right to make informed decisions about your own safety. And I did it because I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of failing again, afraid of admitting I don't know how to protect people without controlling them. That was wrong. I was wrong. Daniel's expression doesn't soften immediately, but something shifts. That's the first time I've heard you admit you were afraid of something. I'm afraid constantly. I just don't show it because fear is considered tactical liability in my profession. That's exhausting. It is. They sit with that acknowledgement. Hayes realizes he's been standing since entering the apartment, military posture, ready to move, and forces himself to sit on the floor, back against the wall, a small gesture of vulnerability, but intentional. "The 3 men you arrested tonight," Daniel says. "What happens if the cartel retaliates? Against you? Extremely unlikely. Retaliation against someone in federal custody protection would guarantee enhanced prosecution. Against me? Slightly more possible, but I'm a hard target. They'd gain nothing and lose operational security by making that attempt. But there's a chance. There's always a chance. That's the nature of engaging with criminal organizations. But the alternative, letting them operate with impunity, is worse. Sometimes you have to accept risk to achieve necessary outcomes. Like you accepted the risk to my safety for your operation?" Hayes winces. "That's a fair comparison, and I don't have a defense against it." Daniel stands, walks to his recording equipment, touches the microphone he uses for interviews. "I need time to think about this. About us. About whether I can trust you again." "That's fair. I'm not cutting you off, I need space to process what happened tonight." Hayes stands, moving toward the door. "Call me when you're ready. Or don't. But know that I'm here, and I'm trying to learn how to be the father you deserve instead of the operator I trained to be. That's all I've ever wanted." Hayes opens the door, pauses. "Your mother would have handled this entire situation better than me. She'd have found a way to protect you and respect your autonomy simultaneously. I'm sorry I can't be that person yet." "Yet is important," Daniel says. "It implies you're trying to change. I need that to be true." "It is true. I'm just not good at it." Hayes leaves. The drive back to Alexandria takes 23 minutes through light traffic. His condo is in a high-rise near the waterfront. 2 bedrooms, mostly empty. Purchased after retirement because the realtor said it had great resale value. Hayes doesn't care about resale value. He bought it because it was defensible, had good sight lines, and was close to DIA headquarters. The apartment contains minimal furniture. A bed, a desk with multiple monitors, a kitchen table he never uses. The second bedroom is a home office filled with classified materials in a government-approved safe. This is not a home. It's a forward operating base for a man who never learned how to be anything except operational. Hayes pours bourbon, Maker's Mark, Christina's favorite, and sits at the desk. Opens his laptop. Stares at the after-action report he needs to complete. The cursor blinks on a blank document. He should feel accomplished. The operation was successful. 3 cartel operatives in custody. Intelligence that will support prosecutions in multiple jurisdictions. 0 civilian casualties. By every tactical metric, tonight was a success, but Hayes feels hollow. He executed a perfect operation and alienated his son in the process. The trade-off seems inevitable. This is who he is, what he's trained to be. But for the first time in his career, he questions whether the trade-off is acceptable. Christina wouldn't have accepted it. She'd have found another way, some approach that balanced operational necessity with human connection. But Christina is gone, and Hayes is left with skills that serve missions but damage relationships. He thinks about Daniel's words. "Being your son should have made you trust me enough to tell me the truth." Trust. That's the variable Hayes failed to account for. He trusted his training, his surveillance assets, his tactical positioning. He didn't trust Daniel to handle the truth and make informed decisions about his own safety. That lack of trust wasn't tactical. It was paternal failure disguised as operational necessity. Hayes starts typing the after-action report. He includes every technical detail, every communication intercept, every tactical decision. What he doesn't include, the moment he watched his son's face when Daniel realized he'd been watched, the weight of betrayal in those 2 words. "You knew." And the recognition that winning the operation meant losing something more important. The report will be filed. The operation will be considered successful. Hayes will receive the professional recognition he's earned. And Daniel will continue living in his tiny Adams Morgan apartment, trying to salvage research that his father contaminated in pursuit of operational excellence. Hayes finishes the bourbon, considers pouring another, decides against it, because maintaining operational readiness is reflexive, even in moments of personal failure. Outside, Alexandria sleeps. Inside, a retired general sits alone in an empty apartment. counting tactical victories and personal losses, wondering if it's possible to learn new strategies at 63 years old. His phone vibrates. Text from Daniel. Thank you for admitting you were wrong. That matters. Still need time, but that matters. Hayes reads the message 3 times, types and deletes 4 different responses. Finally sends, take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready. It's not eloquent. It's not emotionally sophisticated, but it's honest, which is the only currency Daniel values. Hayes closes his laptop, leaves the after-action report incomplete. It can wait until morning. Tonight he needs to sit with the reality of what he's become. A man brilliant at executing operations and terrible at maintaining relationships, and decide whether change is possible, or if this is simply who he'll always be. The clock reads 1:47 a.m. Hayes should sleep. Instead, he opens a file on his computer labeled Christina Personal. It contains photographs from their marriage, emails she sent during deployments, voice messages he saved but rarely listens to. He clicks on a video from 2012, recorded on Daniel's 14th birthday. Christina is in their kitchen at Fort Myer decorating a cake, talking to the Getting Witness Protection relocated. But I thought you should know. This doesn't end with a verdict. It never ends. The line goes dead. Hayes sits motionless, processing the call. Ruiz is out, cooperating, possibly genuine in his warning or possibly delivering a message from the organization. Either way, the threat is real. He texts Daniel, "We need to talk. Tonight." 20 minutes later, Hayes is back at Daniel's apartment explaining the call. So even if Santos goes to prison, the organization remembers, Daniel says quietly. Yes, that's how they maintain power. Long institutional memory, patience, willingness to wait years for retaliation opportunities. Then what do? Hayes sits across from his son, the weight of every operational decision crystallizing into this moment. We have options. FBI can arrange relocation through witness protection. You'd finish your doctorate under a different identity, different city. Or you continue your life with enhanced security awareness, understanding the risk exists but is manageable. Those are terrible options. They are, but they're the options we have. Daniel stands, walks to his window overlooking the alley. Mom lived with threats. You said she got letters. She kept working anyway because the alternative was letting fear dictate her choices. And it killed her. No, an aneurysm killed her. A medical condition she ignored because she was too busy. That's different from being killed by the people she was tracking. The distinction doesn't matter, she's still gone. It matters to me, because if I let this threat change my entire life, new identity, abandoned research, constant fear, then they've already won. They've controlled my behavior without ever taking action. Hayes recognizes his son is right, but every paternal instinct screams to prioritize safety over principle. Christina would say exactly what you're saying, and I'd argue with her the same way I'm arguing with you now, but she never listened, and I suspect you won't either. I listened. I'm just choosing differently than you'd prefer. They sit in silence, father and son, both understanding that this conversation is really about Christina, about how her death shaped their responses to threat, about whether courage means accepting risk or avoiding it. If you stay in D.C., Hayes says finally, we implement security protocols. You vary your routine, maintain situational awareness, report any suspicious surveillance. I'll coordinate with FBI for periodic threat assessment updates, and you keep my number accessible at all times. Okay. I'm serious, Daniel. This isn't optional if you're refusing relocation. I understand, and I'll follow protocols, but I won't live as a ghost because some organization might remember I testified against one of their operators. Hayes nods, accepting reality. His son inherited Christina's courage and Hayes's tactical thinking, a combination that creates both capability and vulnerability. Epilogue. 18 months later, May 2026, Daniel successfully defends his doctoral dissertation, pivoting from live performance research to archival analysis of Corrido evolution from 1970-2020. His committee awards distinction. Johns Hopkins offers him a postdoctoral fellowship. Miguel Angel Santos served 14 months in federal prison, was deported to Mexico in April 2026. No evidence suggests continued operations in D.C., though FBI monitoring continues. Marco Ruiz completed his cooperation agreement, entered witness protection, relocated to an undisclosed location. Javier Delgado served 8 months, was deported, reportedly returned to Los Angeles to work in his family's restaurant business. Hayes completed his retirement memoir, a significantly more honest account than originally intended, acknowledging both operational successes and personal failures. The Defense Intelligence Agency requested he revise the manuscript to remove excessive personal reflection. Hayes declined. The book remains unpublished, sitting in a desk drawer in Alexandria. Father and son now have dinner every Sunday. Sometimes they discuss research and tactics. Sometimes they just eat in comfortable silence. The relationship isn't healed. Trauma doesn't disappear through good intentions, but it's evolving. Daniel still performs occasionally, though he's shifted to teaching corrido history rather than public performance. He understands the risk remains, accepts it as a cost of living authentically rather than in fear. Hayes has learned, slowly, imperfectly, that protecting someone sometimes means trusting them to protect themselves. That control isn't the same as care. That his son isn't an asset to be managed, but a person to be respected. On a Sunday evening in May, they sit in a Georgetown restaurant, discussing Daniel's fellowship offer. It's 3 years, good salary, freedom to pursue independent research, Daniel says. I'd be staying in D.C. You've thought about the security implications? I have. I've decided that building my career here, where Mom worked, where you consulted, feels right. Like I'm continuing something they started. Hayes nods slowly. Your mother would be proud, not just of your research, but of your courage to live openly despite threats. She'd probably tell you the same thing. That taking medical leave, showing up for dinner every week, admitting you don't have all the answers, that took courage too. It still doesn't feel natural. Growth rarely does. They finish dinner. Outside, Washington, D.C. continues its eternal rhythm. Power and politics, threats and opportunities, families trying to navigate space between duty and connection. Hayes walks Daniel to his car, a new Honda Civic that replaced the old Subaru last month. Before Daniel leaves, Hayes says something he's been practicing for weeks. I was wrong. Not just tactically wrong about using you in the operation. Fundamentally wrong about treating relationships like missions, about believing control equals protection. I'm sorry for the years I got that backwards. Daniel pauses, hand on the car door. I know, and I forgive you. Not because the apology fixes everything, but because I see you're trying to change. That effort matters. They don't hug. That's still too unfamiliar, too unlike their established dynamic. But Hayes puts his hand on Daniel's shoulder briefly, and Daniel accepts the gesture without pulling away. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Hayes drives back to Alexandria, pours the last of Christina's bourbon, and opens his laptop. The memoir sits incomplete, waiting for an ending he couldn't write until now. He types, "Some operations succeed tactically but fail strategically. You eliminate the immediate threat but create long-term consequences that undermine the mission's purpose. I spent 40 years executing perfect operations and destroying essential relationships. This memoir is my acknowledgement that operational excellence doesn't equal life success. That winning every battle can still mean losing what matters most. My son and I are rebuilding what I damaged. It's harder than any military operation I've commanded. But for the first time in my career, I'm measuring success not by missions accomplished, but by relationships maintained. That's the real victory I should have been pursuing all along." He saves the document, closes the laptop, finishes the bourbon. Outside, America sleeps, defended by people like Hayes used to be. People who sacrifice relationships for security, who believe control equals safety, who will spend decades learning the same lessons he's finally beginning to understand. Inside, a retired general sits alone, counting costs and occasional victories, wondering if it's ever too late to become the person you should have been all along. His phone vibrates. Text from Daniel. "Thanks for dinner. See you next Sunday." Hayes types. "Looking forward to it." 3 words. Simple. Honest. The kind of communication that took him 40 years to learn. Maybe that's enough. Maybe learning happens slowly. One Sunday dinner at a time. One honest conversation. One small gesture accumulating into something larger. Maybe redemption isn't dramatic. It's just showing up, week after week, until presence becomes relationship, and relationship becomes family. Hayes turns off the lights, leaves the empty bourbon bottle on the counter, and attempts sleep. Tomorrow he'll start working on chapter 2 of the memoir, the chapter about what comes after you've executed every operation successfully and realized you were measuring the wrong outcomes all along. Tonight he rests knowing his son is safe, their relationship is healing, and for the first time in decades, he's prioritizing what actually matters. That's not operational excellence. It's something better. It's enough.